There's a piece of clothing hanging in your closet right now that you've never once brought before God. Not because you're careless, because nobody ever taught you that clothing was something you could bring before Him at all. I've spent years sitting across from people in my office, and I've learned something most churches never say out loud. What you wear is never neutral. Genesis 3:21 tells us that after Adam and Eve sinned, before anything else happened, God Himself made garments and clothed them with His own hands. The first act of grace after the fall wasn't a sermon. It was clothing. So today, 6 items you should never wear, and one question I want you to ask about every single one. Does this still fit who God says I am, or does it fit who I used to be? Before we get into the list, I want to say something that matters more than any single item on it. None of this works as a rule book. If you walk away from this video with a checklist instead of a relationship, I've failed you. This is meant to be a conversation with the Holy Spirit, not a set of rules enforced from outside. With that said, the first is anything that erases the boundary God placed between male and female. I sat with a father once who couldn't stop repeating the same 4 words. Where did we go wrong? His daughter hadn't rebelled loudly. She'd simply started disappearing piece by piece into clothes that erased every marker of who she was, until he barely recognized the child across the dinner table. Deuteronomy 22:5 isn't about boots in a field or comfort in a closet. It's about intention. Genesis 1:27 says God made us male and female on purpose, in His image. Ask the question, does this still reflect the design, or does it quietly erase it? I think about that father often, not because his daughter was beyond hope, but because he never once thought to ask a simple question before it went this far. Is what she's wearing shaping what she believes about herself faster than anything I'm saying to her at the dinner table? Clothing teaches before words ever get the chance to. The second is anything printed with occult or demonic imagery, worn because it looked cool without ever asking what it actually meant. A teenager in our youth group wore a shirt covered in inverted symbols for months before anyone said a word. When I finally asked if he knew what they represented, he shrugged. He genuinely didn't know. That's not innocence. That's exposure without consent. Deuteronomy 7:26 doesn't require your understanding to make something detestable. It just requires it to be detestable. You wouldn't paint that symbol on your front door. Ask the question, would I put this anywhere else I actually control? That young man eventually took the shirt off, not because I lectured him, but because once he understood what he was wearing, he didn't want it near his body anymore. Understanding changes what you're willing to carry. The third is any garment that arrived through a ritual you never chose. A woman in my congregation once wore a beautiful shawl for years, a gift from a relative who'd had it blessed in a private ceremony overseas, candles and words she never fully understood. She wore it out of love, not knowledge. Acts 19 tells us new believers in Ephesus didn't keep their old scrolls out of curiosity once they understood what they carried. They burned them at real financial cost because some objects aren't gifts, they're assignments. The woman with the shawl didn't burn hers in anger. She simply stopped wearing it quietly once she understood what she'd been carrying without ever agreeing to carry it. Ask the question, do I actually know where this came from and what was spoken over it? If any of these 3 are true for you right now, don't scroll past this. Comment, search my closet, Lord, before you keep watching. Because the next 3 are the ones I almost never hear anyone talk about. And one of them might be the hardest thing I say all video. The fourth is clothing chosen specifically to provoke desire instead of reflect dignity. A young woman once sat across from me in tears, exhausted from being reduced over and over to how she looked instead of who she was. What broke my heart wasn't her clothing. It was realizing her whole closet had been shaped by what culture told her would finally make her valuable. Never buy what God had already declared true. 1 Timothy 2 calls us to modesty, not as shame, but as redirection. 1 Corinthians 6:19 calls your body a temple. Genesis 1:31 calls the body very good, before shame ever entered the room. Modesty was never meant to hide something shameful. It was meant to protect something sacred. Ask the question, am I dressing to be seen or dressing to honor what's already sacred? The fifth is anything bought on debt you have no real plan to repay. Worn to project a life you can't actually afford. I knew a man once, always the sharpest suit in the room, deeply respected, admired. Nobody knew what it cost him. When it finally came out, during a season of real accountability, his hands shook as he confessed years of silent credit card debt, all to maintain an image that had nothing to do with his actual life. Proverbs 22:7 says, "The borrower is slave to the lender." Romans 13:8 says, "Owe no one anything but love." John 8:36 promises real freedom, the kind a closet built on debt can never actually deliver, no matter how sharp the suit looks from across the room. Ask the question, am I clothing myself or quietly mortgaging my peace for an image? The sixth is the identity of who you used to be, still hanging in your closet, still coming out on certain days. A brother I know came to faith later in life, delivered powerfully from years tied to violence. A year in, he still wore the same jacket, the same colors. "It's just clothing," he told me almost defensively. But I watched old friends approach him on the street, expecting the old version of him to answer. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says the old has gone, the new has come. Ephesians 4:22 through 24 doesn't just say leave the old self behind. It says put on the new one actively, on purpose, the same way you'd choose any other garment each morning. Ask the question, if I wear this, which version of me is actually showing up? One more thing before we close, and I think it might be the most important part of this whole video. Every single one of these 6 items can become an idol in the opposite direction too. Obsessing over your closet, policing other people's choices, turning discernment into a new performance to be proud of. That's not freedom either. That's just legalism wearing a different outfit. The goal was never a perfect closet. The goal was an honest conversation with God about the one you already have. I want to be honest with you before we close. This was never about legalism, about fabric or brand names or a rulebook nailed to your closet door. God clothed Adam and Eve himself with his own hands, out of love, not restriction. This is about discernment, not fear. 1 Peter 3 says true beauty isn't outward adornment. It's the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. Unfading. Trends fade. Fabric wears thin. What God is building in you was never meant to hang in a closet at all. So here's what I actually want you to do, starting tomorrow morning before you get dressed. Ask the one question we've asked 6 times today. Does this still fit who God says I am? If even one of these 6 hit you today, comment, "Clothe me in your righteousness." Not as a performance, but as an honest declaration. And if there's someone in your life whose closet needs the same gentle question yours just received, send them this today. Not with judgment attached. Just the same question I've asked you 6 times over the last several minutes. It might be the first time anyone's ever asked them to bring it before God at all, the same way it might have been the first time for you tonight. Sitting wherever you're sitting, closet somewhere nearby, finally being asked instead of just getting dressed on autopilot the way you have every other morning of your life.